I'd also like to start by very quickly acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we gather, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's a tremendous privilege to be here this evening surrounded by so many people, both students and business people, with such a strong grounding in the value of becoming involved in the community. Today I wanted to take the opportunity to share with you a little bit about my own personal journey in becoming involved in my own community whilst being a student, and also relate that to how it's important that business can best support young people being active in their communities, but also how it's important that that involvement continues for individuals as they also enter the corporate world. My own personal journey to becoming involved in the community really began about 2 years ago when I was 17. That year, alongside Year 12 in the country, I had the terrific opportunity to become the Senior Air Force Cadet for Australia, something that may surprise many of you. And after having put in the hard yards literally on the parade ground, in the bush and in the air as well, over the last 6 years, I rose through the ranks, and in 2007 I shifted into what was essentially a sort of administrative role. I had the opportunity to travel interstate pretty much every weekend that year, and occasionally overseas, either to meet with some of the 6,500 teenagers who make up the organisation, or to represent their views to senior forums of the Department of Defence. At the end of that year though, partly out of boredom and in preparing for this speech tonight, I also went back to this research. I did some calculations and discovered that as a 17-year-old juggling my final year of school, I'd spent about 100 nights away travelling. I'd been on about 70 commercial flights, and perhaps most inappropriately in the 21st century, I'd emitted about 11 tonnes of carbon emissions that year. But to me, the most important realisation through doing this was that I had missed about 45% of school days. No mean feat, given that at the end of that year, I actually duxed my school, which, as you can imagine, was quite a slap in the face to the teachers who suggested I actually attend school. Throughout the year, I was often quizzed, in fact, by those teachers, or perhaps challenged would be a better word, indeed also by my parents, by my friends, by other cadets, how I could sort of possibly manage being away so much, but also completing the rigours of Year 12. But the truth is, in essence, that as long as I think you realise the relationship between being involved in your community and how that relates back to the academic world, in essence, isn't really that hard of a thing to do. That year I had the opportunity to overcome fears of public speaking, something which obviously feeds into things like your English oral. I would be constantly challenged to think about issues which helped with things like analytical skills, with the social science subjects, and overall learn the ins and outs, perhaps most importantly, of both time and also stress management. In essence though, I would say that it wasn't that hard, because the key to academic success, I feel, is to get involved outside the classroom. And this analogy doesn't just relate to school and university. In many ways, the key to business success is to get involved outside the boardroom too, something that I'm sure the other speakers will talk about today. Being involved in my community is something that since then has always been a central focus of my life. Indeed, at the start of 2008, last year, after having moved to the city for university and leaving cadets, I felt like I was drifting for several months without that sense of involvement in a particular cause. It was then that I conceptualised what has ultimately become Left Right Think Tank, which was set earlier as Australia's first independent and non-partisan think tank of young people. In essence, I wanted to create a platform for young people who were aged 15 to 25, who were passionate about a particular topic, but lacked the networks or the resources to research that further and ultimately to drive it further, but also for them to be able to do that in obviously a non-partisan way, hence the left-right analogy. All the research certainly suggested that young people were just as involved as they have ever been, but that the paradigm of their involvement had shifted from university movements to a more entrepreneurial spread across the community through different forms of participation. They were also, as we all know, shying away from political parties and becoming more cause-focused. Over the last 18 months as an organisation, we have grown across 4 states, from Victoria to New South Wales to Queensland to Western Australia, and we currently have about 50 part-time volunteers in specific roles, some of whom are here tonight, which is great to see actually. The recruitment of staff is also something we've taken quite a corporate and quite a professional approach to, which I think is part of our success. We've rolled out highly successful programs on the ground like regular dialogue-based events, a comprehensive sort of policy development cycle, and a training program for high school students which provides them different viewpoints on how policy is developed. Getting young people involved though over the course of that time I don't think has necessarily been the biggest challenge. In fact, I think in large part young people are eager to get involved, particularly alongside their studies, and seek out these sort of opportunities themselves. The main challenge is in fact has been securing corporate and financial support for our work. Up until the start of this year, in fact, we had no money at all, besides the slim margins of fortnightly youth allowance payments, as some of you probably know. And it was an incredibly stressful time having developed the organisation publicly, but also with bills rolling in and a launch event committed to. It really was all starting to come to a head. I'm happy to say though that today we have a budget expected to near $200,000 in the current financial year, with partners such as the Foundation for Young Australians, Mallisons, which is Australia's most successful law firm, Shell, the University of Western Australia, and believe it or not, the United States State Department as well. In many ways, it is disappointing that a barrier to becoming involved in your community and driving change is essentially money, but that is life. What is important though is when that money is invested in the community, that it is done in the most beneficial way. Many of you have probably heard me speak about what I would term as sort of culture of tokenism, that in many ways is sort of encroached upon youth participation and engagement in this country. A culture that often drives flashy CSR strategies and sometimes meaningless opportunities for young people to become involved in their communities. Many of these opportunities are also, young people are often seduced by them through things like attractive titles and appearances. The reality though is that the best way for business to support young people is not necessarily to create and run new programs for them, but to support existing programs or help foster their own initiatives. A process of support, not production, is the key to success here for everyone involved. This also just doesn't have to focus on money, with research showing that businesses who provide staff with dedicated time off each year to focus on volunteer work, such as the ABC, for example, with the Air Force cadets, believe it or not, or who focus their pro bono work on their staff's community activities, such as Deloitte, have a higher level of job satisfaction and retention rates. In other words, community involvement by business should be seen as a holistic process, bringing its own dividends at every turn. So I hope that's given you a bit of a snapshot of the sort of importance of becoming involved in your community, but also how business can best support that involvement. Being involved in your community, whether it is alongside study or alongside work, is important. But it is also important that in doing so, you recognise they aren't mutually exclusive values. In my opinion, the lessons you learn, whether they are in the classroom, the boardroom, or the community, are all interrelated. It is important that if you're at university, not only do you get involved, but that you continue to be involved once you enter the workforce too. Building a career is about being involved in community and pro bono activities. There are a number of areas that need good people, so don't limit yourself. Always look for more things to do to broaden your experience and ultimately give back. All the best, and see you at the door. Thank you.